You always wondered why she looked at you like that, as if you'd interrupted a conversation she was having without words. You thought you could reason with her, draw a clean line between what was fair and what was false. But logic doesn't open locked boxes, and she is a locked box made of velvet and bone. You try to meet her mind, but her mind is not where she lives. She lives in the space between women, where names are left out, where eyes carry stories like blood. She never needed to say it the moment she shared silence with another woman. She was already home. You never entered the house. They bond through whispers, not proof, through betrayal masked as loyalty, through half smiles that cut deeper than knives. You keep speaking, but you are outside the circle, outside the code, outside the secret, and still, you believe you're safe because she smiles. But secrets don't betray logic. They simply never needed it. If this whisper has found your reflection, let it haunt. Like the video, leave your echo in the comments, subscribe, and stay in the hush between sentences. A woman never truly speaks. She reflects what the other woman cannot admit, and together they seal it beneath silence. You thought her silence was emptiness, but silence, in her world, is the deepest form of communion. A silence not of absence, but of saturated presence woven thick with shared glances, unfinished sentences, and half-buried wounds passed like heirlooms from one woman to another. You saw two women sitting side by side, saying nothing. You assumed nothing was happening, but the air between them was dense with invisible agreements. She didn't need to say it. Her pain was mirrored in the other's eyes, and the mirror closed around them like a spell. You wanted language. You asked her to explain, but her secrets were not made for dissection. They were not built to survive exposure. The truth, for her, is not something to be uttered. It is something to be protected, not from you necessarily, but from the cold dismemberment of logic, from the sterile glare of analysis. She has been trained since girlhood to wrap the unspeakable in silk, to carry it in her gaze, to trade it in glances, to bury it in bedrooms and powder rooms and bathrooms with locked doors, where men write arguments, women weave covenants of quiet. She didn't trust you with her silence, not because you were cruel, but because you believed silence was neutral. You thought absence of speech meant absence of meaning, and that made you dangerous, because the moment you asked her to name it, to unfold it like a napkin on a table, you shattered the mirror. She wasn't hiding, she was preserving the sacred shape of something unsaid, unruined by explanation. She learned it early that being too clear is a risk, that saying too much is a threat, that the girl who tells the truth out loud becomes the girl who bleeds alone. So instead, she practiced the art of suggestion. She learned to wrap warnings inside compliments, to mourn without crying, to reveal only to those who have been broken in a similar way. And when she found another woman with the same fracture line in her heart, the recognition was instant. They didn't need a conversation. They needed only the glance. That's why you will never understand the bond. You look for it in shared interests, in mutual opinions, in logical coherence. But that's not where the bond lives. The bond lives in the shared illusion, or more precisely, in the shared refusal to break the illusion. When two women connect, they do so by mirroring what the other cannot face. Not to deceive, but to protect. They become keepers of each other's half-truths, a shadow economy of emotion, where currency is fear, and value is found in concealment. You asked her what was wrong, and she said nothing. But her friend already knew, because her friend had once said nothing in that same tone, with that same posture, and had once been held in silence by someone who knew what it really meant. You offered logic. Her friend offered memory. You wanted to fix her. Her friend wanted to bleed with her without words, without resolution, just presence. And in that presence, she felt seen. She didn't need an answer. She needed the echo of her wound in someone else's chest. You think women bond through agreement, but women bond through shared denial, through knowing the same thing and deciding, together, not to say it. The deeper the pain, the more carefully it must be handled. And logic has no gloves. Logic grabs, it points, it names. But secrets must be carried, not named. They must be cradled like something alive and fragile, not pinned like insects to a board. She told her friend everything without saying a word. They spoke through symbols, a hand on the wrist, an unread message left untouched, a photo removed from a frame. You saw nothing, but you weren't meant to. You were the outer world, the man of cause and effect, of questions and answers. And in that moment, you became the enemy of the sacred not by what you did, but by what you couldn't not do. Try to understand. Try to explain. She remembers everything, not in facts, but in atmospheres. The way a room felt when her friend touched her shoulder. The taste of her own silence when she almost said too much. The echo of a moment that passed like a ghost between them. You remember the words. She remembers the texture beneath them. And the bond is built in that texture, not what in the speech. You ask why she didn't come to you, but she did, in small ways, in half-hung sentences, in subtle withdrawals, in sudden stillness. And you missed it because you expected a declaration. But she is a mythic creature. Her language is not shaped by grammar, but by gesture. You demanded translation, but her soul has no subtitles. She called her friend afterward. They said almost nothing, but they heard everything. The crack in her voice, the pause too long, the fake cheeriness that sagged in the middle. And in that space, they met, not in the words, but in the void between the words. They are lovers of the in-between, while you, poor man, remain addicted to the explicit. You still think you lost her to another man, but you lost her to a mirror held by someone who knew how to reflect her shame without naming it, who knew how to hold the unbearable, not in explanation, but in echo. You offered solutions. Her friend offered reflection. You offered answers. Her friend offered a ritual. And in the end, that's what womanhood is: not a fact, not a body, not a role, but a secret language spoken only through mirrors, where pain is not solved, but sanctified, where the deepest truths are kept behind veils, and only shown to those who have bled in the same shape. You think love means no secrets, but for her, love means guarding the secret with someone, not revealing it to them. And her friend she knew how to guard, how to protect the sacred shape of the unspoken. She knew how to nod instead of question, how to stay, not ask, how to mirror, not shatter. That is the mirror inside the mirror, the one you'll never see. Because you want the truth, and she wants the form of truth, the atmosphere, the echo, the intimacy of implication. Her world is made of those things. Yours is made of facts, and so she left the room, not physically, but symbolically. She crossed into that other space, where women dwell in shared silence. And once she was there, she did not return. You saw her body, but her soul was already speaking, in a language you never learned. She never lied, she never betrayed. She just retreated into a place where you could not follow, not because you weren't allowed, but because you weren't broken in the right way. She lives now in the hush between two glances, in the pause at the end of a sentence, in the coded silence of women who've suffered the same wound. You tried to enter with a key, but there was no door, only a mirror, only a silence, only the secret. Female loyalty is born not from agreement, but shared betrayal. They love each other through the knife, not around it. You still think they hate each other. You watch them with narrowed eyes, interpreting every sideways glance, every too polite tone as evidence of tension. But what you don't understand, what you were never meant to understand, is that the tension is the intimacy. They are not avoiding the wound, they are dancing around it. And in that dance, they recognize each other, because a woman does not bond through softness. She bonds through shared cuts, jagged, remembered, symbolic. You saw them smile as if nothing had happened, but women smile in the aftermath of war. Their friendship is not defined by how little harm they do, but how much harm they forgive. The closer the bond, the sharper the blade they carry, not to kill, but to test the strength of each other's silence. She doesn't trust the woman who's never hurt her. That woman is unproven. It is only after the betrayal, the wound, the hush that follows if the other woman stays, remains, that loyalty begins. You've never bled for love and called it holy, but she has. Many times. The first time, maybe it was her mother, or her sister, or the friend who whispered a secret and then twisted it. The pain didn't push her away. It drew her in. Because pain is currency in the world of women. Not in the masochistic sense, but in the sense of recognition. You bled there, too. You smiled through that, too. Then we are the same species. That's why you cannot measure the depth of her friendships by peace. Peace is sterile. Their love is forged in fire, misunderstandings, jealousies, absences, and the betrayal that lingers just long enough to be metabolized into memory. That is the rhythm. Cut, bleed, reconcile, hold tighter. She doesn't believe in friendships untouched by pain. To her, those are paper dolls, fragile, flat, incapable of carrying the weight of her truth. You remember the argument she had with her closest friend, the silence that lasted weeks, the slammed door, the unspoken fury, and then the reunion, the way they sat across from each other, eyes glistening, no apologies needed, just presence, the wound still raw, but worn like a shared necklace. They don't need to resolve the betrayal, only to survive it together. The survival is the bond. You, meanwhile, ask why she keeps going back, why she forgives, why she lets herself be hurt again. But she isn't being weak, she's being faithful to the ritual. You think betrayal is an ending, she sees it as a rite of passage. And the women who've gone through it with her, who've drawn blood and stayed, who've seen her ugly and not turned away, those are her chosen ones. Not despite the wound, because of it. And in that logic, inverted and primal, she also chooses you. You, who cut her with your silence, your disbelief, your blind logic. She remembers the things you didn't see, the night she cried into a pillow while you slept beside her, the look she gave you before she said, "I'm fine." The slight hesitation in her voice that begged for intuition, not interrogation. You failed her not by malice, but by limitation. Still, she stayed, and that, too, is part of the myth. Staying through the wound, not pretending it never happened, but holding it, naming it without words, feeding it through glances. She doesn't need you to undo the damage. She needs you to become a place where damage is allowed to remain sacred, a scar she can trace in silence. When she sits with her friend again, they talk about everything but the betrayal. The betrayal is there, humming under the table, and that's what makes the coffee sweeter, what makes the laughter carry echoes. It is not a friendship free of damage, it is a friendship consecrated by damage. They've survived each other, and in doing so, they've become each other's proof that one can be hurt and still be held. You ask again, why not talk it out? But words are shallow graves. She has learned that explaining a betrayal only deepens it. They don't need closure. They need a pause, a sacred one after which both return changed. Humbled, sharpened, they do not resolve. They contain, and so she holds the memory of her friend's lie like a relic, not to accuse, but to remember the shape of forgiveness. She knows her friend lied, and her friend knows she knows. But that shared knowledge, held in the hush, becomes something holy. It is not forgetfulness. It is chosen remembrance of the pain, of the cost, of the survival. They look at each other across a room, and the wound smiles back. You never understood why she called that woman her best friend. You saw competition, pettiness, manipulation. You were right, but only on the surface. Underneath, there was a mirror, and in that mirror, your woman saw a version of herself she couldn't hold alone. A twin wound, slightly differently shaped, but resonant. You wanted her to choose you instead, but you were never cut in the same place. Even in romantic love, she is shaped by these primal initiations. She tests you, not because she doubts you, but because she needs to feel the boundary. She creates a small wound, watches how you react. Will you retreat? Will you respond with logic, with power, with anger? Or will you recognize the dance, the feminine rhythm of pain followed by presence? If you pass, she trusts you with more. Not more words, but more silence. She trusts you to sit in the unspeakable with her, not to fix, not to analyze, but to reflect, to absorb the echo of her wound and give it back, softened. That is what her friend knows how to do. That is what she craves in you. And if you fail, if you demand clarity, fairness, balance, then you become unsafe. Not because you hurt her, but because you cannot carry what she carries. You become a man of answers in a world that worships the question. She returns again and again to the women who've hurt her, not out of foolishness, but because she knows those are the ones who've seen her without mask, without makeup, without mercy, and chose to stay anyway. She does not seek the absence of pain. She seeks its transcendence. This is the strange truth you can't accept, that in her world. The deepest loyalty is tested through cruelty. That intimacy is born not through comfort, but through chaos. And that forgiveness is not given. It is earned through the willingness to bleed and still return. So the next time you see her laughing with the one who once betrayed her, don't ask her why. She doesn't laugh because she forgot. She laughs because they both remember and chose, together, to remain anyway. In that laughter lives the pain, and in the pain lives the proof that love can endure knives, and sometimes needs them. You are not invited because you cannot be initiated. Male logic asks for entry, but female secrets are inherited, not earned. You always assumed there was a door, that if you knocked long enough, softened your tone, mastered your empathy, she would let you in. You believed intimacy was a transaction, offer vulnerability, gain access. But this isn't a room you enter by effort. This is a circle, a sacred one drawn in ash and blood and silence, and it has no opening for you. Not because she hates you, but because you were not born into the right. You watched her with her mother, her aunt, her cousin, her friend. Watched the glances, the private jokes, the sudden hush when you walked into the room. You laughed nervously and asked what you'd missed. But it was never about you. You simply reminded them of the outer world, the cold world, the one where they must smile without softness, speak without safety, protect the ancient codes without slipping. You are kind, you are rational, you are thoughtful, but you will never be one of them. You didn't earn your exile, you inherited it, just as they inherited their initiation. For generations, their mothers taught them how to shape pain into politeness, how to carry terror in the curve of a smile. You weren't there when they first bled in shame, when they learned that silence could be a shield, when they whispered into the hair of another girl after a humiliation that still pulses in her limbs. These things were not taught in classrooms. They were not spoken out loud. They were passed in glances, in posture, in encoded rituals that repeat themselves across centuries. And you, clear-eyed, noble-hearted, brave in your desire to connect, are still an outsider, because you ask. You always ask. What's wrong? Why didn't you tell me? What are you thinking? But the circle does not open to questions. It opens to recognition. Recognition not of facts, but of essence. That ache behind the eye. That tiny smile that folds over grief. That sharp, soft sigh that means we cannot say it, but we know. You've mistaken your intellect for a key, but the circle isn't locked. It's veiled, and veils are not torn down. They're lifted only when the one beneath it believes you carry the same wound, and your wound is different. Yours bleeds out loud, theirs bleeds inward, hidden, perfumed, sacred. That's why they gather in bathrooms and kitchens and dim-lit corners of noisy restaurants. That's why they lean in too close. Why their laughter sometimes sounds like mourning. Why a glance can hold more meaning than any poem. That's why when one woman nods, another woman cries. Because the nod means you're not insane. I bled there, too. You were there when she miscarried. You held her. You did everything right. And still, she called her friend before she spoke to you. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. The friend answered with silence. And in that silence they sat together for hours. No advice, no analysis, just shared exile. A kind of holy co-suffering. A grief you could only witness, but never enter. You thought I should be enough, but love isn't access. Love is proximity, and sometimes proximity means knowing you are near, but not inside. You were warm, you were kind, you were close, but you were not part of the circle, and part of you hated that. She doesn't mean to shut you out, she means to survive. The circle is survival. A womb made of pain and recognition and chosen blindness. They don't need you there. They need each other to verify their memories, to interpret the symbols of their suffering, to stitch language around what has never been named. You see a woman smiling at her enemy. You think she's fake, but she's following code. Code that says smile, survive, store the wound, tell no one but the circle. And in that moment, another woman sees the mask, recognizes the burden beneath it, and nods, not in pity, but in allegiance. You think justice is clarity, but for them, justice is continuity, to keep going, to not fall apart, to not be erased. And for that, they need each other more than they need the truth. You ask her why she didn't tell you about the betrayal, why she told her friend instead. But her friend knew before she said a word. Her friend saw it in the way she touched her tea, in the way she rearranged her spoon, in the too still way she sat. Secrets between women are not shared. They are revealed through resonance. And you, no matter how perceptive, don't speak that language. You never learned the dialect of dread hidden in posture, the scream wrapped in a soft voice, the invitation in the withdrawal. You speak the language of solutions, she speaks the language of symbols, and the circle is fluent in symbol. Even when women betray each other, they rarely leave the circle, because to be inside the circle is to know that betrayal is woven into the fabric, that one day the one you trusted will fail you and you'll stay anyway, because exile is worse, because outside the circle no one understands the wound. That's why the circle has no door, because there is no way in. You are either born into it by suffering, or you are not. And if you are not, then you remain what you are, a tender intruder. You still believe truth should be spoken, but she has learned that truth, when spoken to the wrong person, becomes danger, so she protects it with rituals. You call them passive aggression. She calls them shields. When she tells her friend, "I don't trust him anymore," what she really means is, "I wanted to be known without having to explain myself." And her friend nods, not because she agrees, but because she remembers that ache. They don't exchange arguments. They exchange recognitions. Even when they are cruel to each other, there is something holy in it. A brutality with memory, a fight held gently, a slap that says, "I still see you." You see hypocrisy, they see continuity. You see chaos, they see choreography. You wanted to be her sanctuary, but the circle already is. You offered her freedom, but the circle offered her understanding. You offered her words, but the circle gave her silence that didn't need to be broken. And when you ask her, again, what's wrong, she may answer. She may even cry. But the part of her that bleeds in symbols, that lives in gestures, that was born under a lineage of unspeakable sorrow, that part of her has already disappeared into the circle, and you will not follow. Not because she forbids you, but because it was never yours to enter. There is no door. There is only the veil. There is only the hush. There is only the inheritance. She sits at the table, smiling. A woman across from her mirrors the smile. No words pass. But something darker than memory flickers between their eyes. You open your mouth to speak. You think this is your moment. But the room tilts slightly. The air thickens. You realize they've already answered, and you were never in the question. The circle breathes, the silence remains.